the skills actually by which you get things done are so fundamentally different, because it's not just you and a computer screen. It's you trying to communicate. It's you clearing blockers and, stopping other things and giving feedback and doing these things that are just not your day to day as a programmer.
Welcome to the Schmidt List, the podcast for people dedicated to managing successful projects, developing impactful products, and building engaged teams. And now, here's your host, Kurt Schmidt.
Okay, well, Ryan, thank you for joining me on the show today.
Thank you for having me, Kurt.
Oh, I'm glad you're here. So you've had a really interesting background, a very successful career. How did you get involved into software development in the first place?
Yeah, it was like one of those things in life that you just kind of fall into. I was pursuing my passion. I actually graduated from college in political science. I worked in politics for a couple of years. I don't like to talk about that, but I probably should bring this up in the podcast.
That's all right.
That brought me to law school, which I did for 3 years, graduated, and practiced law for a year. And I think it was starting to become apparent to me in law school that I wasn't really enjoying the law. I wanted to give it a fair shake. You make that investment. I gave it a year at a firm downtown here. Mm-hmm. And I think to really be successful in your career and happy in life, you have to wake up passionate about what you do. And there's always those days you dread it. But overall, you have to be really, really excited about it. Yeah. It stops being work and it becomes a labor of love. Mm-hmm. And I wasn't feeling that about being a lawyer. Not that there's anything wrong with being a lawyer. A lot of my friends still are, but just wasn't for me.
It wasn't your bag.
Yeah. So I had your quintessential quarter life crisis where kind of did some soul searching, kind of looked back at what I'd been enjoying most of my life. I had been around computers since as long as I have a memory.
Sure.
My dad has done tech sales here in Minnesota and was doing computer sales. He said this one time, and I hope he's listening or not listening, but he said he sold the first PC in Minnesota.
Is that right?
Which may or may not be true, but we could just say it's true.
So you do have a long history with it.
Yeah. So I taught myself how to program when I was like 12, back when blink tags were on, in HTML blink tags were a thing, and you had that construction worker digging on the internet. I made the website for the company my dad was at. And since then, I've just been around tech and loving it. So
good.
When I wasn't happy being a lawyer, it kind of made sense to go into programming.
Yeah. And so, but eventually you kind of kicked off your own kind of mobile area. You started in mobile, right? And kicked off your own business there, right?
Yeah. This is when I was kind of having this what do I want to be when I grow up moment. It was right after the iPhone came out and right around the first version of the SDK. Mm-hmm. And I fell in love with the iPhone early on. I switched. Do you remember it was just on AT&T?
Yeah.
I swear. I bailed on Sprint. I went to AT&T.
I bailed on Verizon, man.
I actually got off my parents' plan at that point. Maybe probably too late as an adult, but it was that motivating of a factor for me to go get an iPhone.
Apple helped you grow up, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so I taught myself how to program. I taught myself Objective-C, making iPhone apps. I think it was a wonderful way that's this like self-contained unit to kind of make this beautiful experience for users, and taught myself there. Then found out that apps are very, very tough business, but there was a large demand for app developers, and I went into consulting then. Mm-hmm.
And then you ended up at HyperIQ, right? And then BuzzFeed bought HyperIQ, right?
Yes.
Or
yeah.
acquired.
So what I was doing some consulting for a company called RedStamp locally here in Minnesota that did kind of postcard and e-cards. They got bought by Taylor Corp. So that I didn't want to go to Mankato.
Yeah.
For a litany of reasons. Sure. So then was kind of going back to general consulting. Met a guy in the local community here named Phil Wilson, who's a wonderful human being. Phil and I took over what was Recursive Awesome, rebranded it HyperIQ.
Yeah.
BuzzFeed was a client of ours. And then BuzzFeed was like, come to New York and run our mobile team. And I was like, wonderful. It was the perfect timing in my life, had very few ties.
Nice.
Jumped over there and then had this wonderful idea, like, we hired a lot of great people at HyperIQ. We should go have them working for us at BuzzFeed.
Yeah.
So we ended up buying HyperIQ after I left.
That's great. So I'm imagining during that sort of transition there is when you started to really focus less on development and started focusing more on the management side of things, right? Was that done purposefully, or did you also trip and fall kind of into that as well?
No, for me personally, it was just kind of, I stumbled into it. It just kind of just progressed.
It just happened.
Yeah. RedStamp, I think we had hired our first iOS engineer on the engineering side. That was the first time I managed an engineer was at RedStamp.
Okay.
I had managed, actually, when I was working in politics, a decent-sized team. Okay. So I had been in this role before, but not in the engineering sense.
Right. Not when you know everything better than everybody else.
Yeah. And you know, I think as an engineer, you're very prone to having strong opinions about how to do things.
No.
Yeah, I know.
That's so odd. You're such an odd duck.
Yeah, it's true. Definitely an outlier there.
Definitely an outlier. So with that, then, was that part of the transition was like, how do you let go of the stuff that you're working on? Because that's some of the discussions I have with people over the years that move from that sort of, okay, I was a great project manager. Now I'm in charge of all the project managers, or I was a great designer. Now I'm in charge of a design team. Like, how did you find letting go of the work? How did that, was that easy? Were you like, cool, no backsies?
No, it wasn't for me. And having managed first time managers a bunch of times, it rarely is easy for anyone to kind of come to terms with, I just need to let this person go off and explore and learn and make some mistakes, even though I could do this faster or better.
Right, exactly.
And it takes a lot of self-restraint to get to that level where, like, I'm fine with it.
Yeah.
And it's something I think every first-time manager struggles with. They don't give you a handbook when you get your first report, usually.
In today's world, you see it more often, and I say it on the show a lot, is that you're the best developer. Now you get to be in charge of the development team. And it's hard for that person to say no to that promotion when it's it's literally a promotion, right?
Yep, absolutely. I think that you look more institutionally. I think there's two big problems at companies, at least in terms of engineering management. It's one is that a lot of companies don't bifurcate their career ladder. So the only way to advance in a company is by becoming a manager of people and not maybe a great individual contributor. And I think that's very flawed. I think you can be the great individual contributor can be even more valuable than a great manager at times. And you should have that path. So people get pushed down this management path because it's the only way that I'm going to go up in my career. And that's stupid to be in that environment. People should change that.
Right.
So you get pushed into that thing, and people don't realize it's a completely different skill set. It's almost like you quit your job as an engineer or really whatever you do, and now you're a manager. Management is a job.
Yeah, that's a different job.
Totally different. Yep. Like what made you good at being an engineer is not going to make you good at being a manager. And a lot of times, I've noticed this with teams that I may have inherited where I had to clean this up a bit, where really what made you a great engineer actually hamstrings you the most as a manager.
Right.
The best engineering managers or just managers that have not been best at engineering or the discipline that they've been at.
Right.
They're good at some of these other things that are just nice to have.
Yeah.
Make you great managers.
Right. Because technology and design moves and changes so fast, those good managers, they've got to be super curious people. They've got to what is that? Well, let me pick that up and shake it and see what that's like, which is similar to what a developer or designer needs to do, right? Like you're saying, those skills you need to have. But when it comes to dealing with a computer problem versus a person problem, right? You could try to attack the person problem the way you would do squashing a bug, right? But
we're probably not going to solve the problem. I really think that now this is going to sound weird, but I'm in people engineering, right?
Yeah.
And when you start to manage managers and get bigger, it's even then about how do you create the systems. Like you're an architect of org chart and teams and structures. It's similar in that regard, but the skills actually by which you get things done are so fundamentally different because it's not just you and a computer screen. It's you trying to communicate. It's you clearing blockers and, stopping other things and giving feedback and doing these things that are just not your day to day as a programmer.
Right. And that's like learning new muscle memory, right? Oh no, I've got to have a one-on-one and things like that, right?
Yep.
So the thing I wanted, because I've been fortunate enough to help be part of a lot of growing agencies over the years, and I've seen the same thing happen over and over again. And I would imagine maybe you experience this too, but tell me if I'm wrong, which is, you start that kind of business, you get that business going and you're like, we're not going to be like everybody else. And no, down with HR. And we don't need that. And we don't need this stuff there. It's too corporate. I'm using air quotes for people listening. It's too corporate. And then as you get bigger and bigger, you realize we need stuff like this, right?
Yep.
Did you go through that? Did you experience that?
Yeah. I mean, multiple times in my career.
Okay.
And I've also had to go back and correct some of the places. I've had to fix that problem before where they went through that, where they didn't really do the good job of thinking about management as kind of a separate discipline.
Mm-hmm.
And they had managers, but they weren't people that were even passionate about managing. We had to go, fix that problem. Yeah. But I think if you are at a growing startup, it's easy to be, and to some degree, you should be very concerned about just shipping your product, getting out there, getting the market, finding product market fit feedback. And because if you don't do that, you're not going to be around.
Right, there's no business.
Exactly. But at some point, when you find that product market fit and you start to grow your team, you really have to think about, how do I put in place a management structure and really be disciplined in the sense that the people that got you there may not be the people that you need to manage the team. Mm-hmm. And I think where I've seen it go wrong is people like, that's that great engineer who can do all these things. And then I need a manager. That person's good at being an engineer. Now you're the manager of the team. And 9 times out of 10, that probably goes haywire. Yeah. And then you go back into the situation where you have to have that conversation. Well, you're not really enjoying your job anymore. They might leave the company. Right. Their reports get unhappy. And
it's hard to go backwards in a growing company too, right?
Exactly. It's always tough to undo some of these things where you give a too high of a title, or or you Peter Principle up somebody. And it's much easier to just be a little bit more restrained.
Makes sense. So if I'm building a development team, Ryan, and I'm getting to that point where I need to start thinking about management or HR or things like, should the general rule be like I should always look outside, or like what have you found success in or failure even in those choices as you start to hit that tipping point? What would be your advice to somebody?
I would say that, if you're hiring your first engineering manager or really manager generally, it'd be probably good to have somebody that has some degree of experience managing. So you're not teaching from scratch. You're able to delegate pieces of like management more wholesale than just trying to get somebody up to speed on it. Even if you have somebody internally that has that potential that you think to be a great manager, it's usually better bringing somebody with a little bit of experience that can coach and then kind of build it out over time. Then your second manager could be maybe internal.
Got it.
It always depends on like team dynamics and challenges of the day, but generally I would say your first manager should probably not be a first-time manager.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, because again, you especially because you're creating that culture in a way, right? Because it's new and it's growing, right? And it's really hard to undo anything in culture.
Yeah. The impact of culture, like it extends. It's so, let me rephrase that, like culture is so impactful. Right. Is, yeah. It affects the product you make, how fast you make that product, the quality of it, whether people are happy, whether they have good personal lives. The culture of your company is really the only thing that drives the output of the company. Mm-hmm. And the people you hire are ultimately what makes that culture. Right. And the people you put into a management role have a slightly bigger impact on what that culture is. So really being conscious about who you want to say this person is a leader of people. Not that you can lead and not be a manager, but you have to be a leader and be a manager when you're a manager. You want to be very deliberative about that. Yeah. Especially when you are a smaller company, because then the risk associated with each move is substantially higher. Yeah. Because just like you said, it's hard to go backwards. It's hard to undo that stuff. Once you stick maybe potentially a toxic person in a role that shouldn't be there, undoing that, I mean, could take years in some cases, right? Yeah. And the reality of management is that when they're a toxic person, they're unhappy because you're a manager. They have people reporting to them. They're probably making the people that report into them unhappy too. Yeah. And it makes it exponentially worse, that toxic effect. Yeah. So it's something to be really, really careful. The number one reason people leave their job is not because of salary or anything else. It's really they don't like their manager. Mm-hmm. Right. And so let's talk about building a development team, right? So where have you found the most success when working with developers and building development teams? Is it building small teams that have lots of diverse people? Is it putting like-minded, stack developers together on a team? Like, how have you found a way to kind of mold teams into a way where you found success? Yeah, for me, I go a little bit out of the norm here. And to me, I think there are two things that matter more important than anything else. Like, more than experience, more than anything, it is, are you passionate about doing the job? Mm-hmm. This is even for development, like any job. These are my two priorities. Sure. It's like, are you really excited to go back, to get up, to go to work every morning and do the job at hand? When you interview with me, I will ask you the question, like, what gets you excited to go to work every day? Mm-hmm. And if you say people, that's probably not the right answer. It's usually something about like, oh, I really like to code. I really like to make things if you're an engineer. Because you'll go that extra mile then. And then the second piece is just, are you smart? Right? Right. There's no substitute for passion and intelligence. You can have all the experience in the world. And I really don't. You need experience. in an engineering org to a degree, but I don't prioritize that to the same extent those first do. Because, 3 months on, 6 months on, that smart, passionate, less experienced person is going to be light years ahead of that experienced, not excited, maybe not as intellectually sharp person. And you made a much better investment if you prioritize those other things.
Yeah, that's something I've heard lots of other leaders on this show talk about is they're hiring and positioning people to the skills you can't really teach, more so than the teachable skills.
I will say one other thing for engineers that's important to me too, kind of the skills you can't teach, is communication. I think engineering can have this reputation in the market as a whole as like a solo person sport, one person at a computer typing away.
Yeah, in a dark room with headphones.
Exactly. And while engineers may wear headphones from time to time, it's a very collaborative activity. And to succeed as an engineer, you need to be able to communicate with other people, not necessarily be, outgoing and social.
Right,
That's
the life of the party.
Yeah. You don't need to be an extrovert, but you need to write good documentation or be able to communicate on Slack or just have a basic conversation. This is where that's at. So, that's probably my third most important thing is, can I have a conversation with you about this technical topic?
Got it. So so what I'm hearing you say is maybe you might build a diverse team based on those types of skill sets, right? People complementing each other, not necessarily like, well, this is the iOS team, so you're all iOS people sitting at this desk working together, right?
Exactly. This is where you need a degree of experience.
Yeah.
Actually, when I was consulting, we made a lot of money off of clients who didn't have any experience with iOS, and they had an iOS team who didn't know what they're doing, and then things went haywire. You need a degree of experience to kind of guide with best practices and lead and set some examples and convey that out. You need just a little bit of that. You don't need a whole team of experienced developers in my mind. You just need a little bit of it. And my other thought on just engineers is if you are a smart, talented, passionate person and you don't have iOS experience, you can learn Swift. You'll go that extra mile. You actually probably enjoy doing it. Yeah. At my current company, Foodsby, our backend, our new stuff is in Kotlin. There's not a lot of Kotlin server-side engineers right now. I don't think I've seen one resume across my desk of somebody who has Kotlin server-side experience. But we do it. It's great. It's working great for us. But it means that we have to get them up to speed and people have to learn.
Yeah, that's an investment, right? Yeah.
And it's totally fine. If you know that going on, I'll hire a Python developer to write Kotlin. It's totally fine. And
that is really interesting what you just said, because you're working in this lesser known technology, you really have to lean in on the can you be curious and work with others and communicate and passionate about learning new things, right?
Yep.
So if I'm hiring developers, what are some of the like you just mentioned? Those are some of the characteristics and stuff you look for, right? What are some of your favorite interview questions?
Oh, my favorite interview questions. So I just gave you the one I ask everyone. It's not just an engineering question. Some other things I generally ask, and I feel like I'm giving away the playbook for my interviews.
No, it's fine.
So
nobody listens to this show. It's fine. It's just you and me.
I also use this as a chance to learn. I would say there's two things I do. I will write out a list of questions for whatever role I'm trying to hire for, based on what I think I need for that role and what the challenges are. I don't think this is a challenge at Foodsby. For example, I will ask what they think of automated testing if we don't have automated testing as part of our engineering culture. That both gives me information on that thing. And also, I think interviewing is a two-way street tells them that, to me, automated testing is important. So if you're selecting here, so
it's kind of a tabs versus spaces kind of question.
Yeah, exactly. So that
a much more mature one.
Yeah. I'll also ask almost everyone what they're excited about in tech. I've actually moved away from asking what their side projects are. I think that's an unfair question because, you end up excluding people who have families and lives outside of work. And actually, that's actually very valuable. And I don't it wouldn't be fair to ask me that because I don't have time to, work on side projects. I'm busy at work and I want to spend time with my wife.
Yeah.
So, but I think everyone's still excited about that language. I think that they would want to explore. This is that thing. So I ask everyone kind of, what are you excited about in tech as a way to get at that, to see, are they reading the latest, blogs or whatnot, coming up with new ways to solve problems. Is kind of another kind of key thing. And then beyond that, it gets really kind of I'll usually work through an architectural challenge that I kind of have in my head or currently facing, both because it gives me a way to think out loud. And also, I think that's a big piece of what you do as an engineer is just talk through a solution to a problem. So
let's say, you've gone through that interview process. Like you said, you've hired these folks. You've already got kind of a team together. You kind of have a good idea where they're going to fit in with the team, and you set them up to go, and then they start to struggle. What's the typical thing that you've seen with developers? What are the typical things they struggle with when they get involved with a new team? Like where should I be looking for when I add that team member? Where should I be careful?
Yeah, I think it's easy to go off the deep end and get too far into the deep end of the pool and start drowning. It essentially they bite off more than they can chew. And I think with any project, you need to ease into it so you can kind of understand why you're doing it, how these things interact, and you could go and start to re-architect an entire system instead of a small function. And it's better if you start on that small scale. And I think where I've seen people struggle is like they try to do too much based on their knowledge of the externals, like the rest of the system or the company itself they just joined. And it's usually because they don't start small, they start big, and they need more guidance there.
That's great. Okay, I'm going to go back just a quick second to the thing we kind of started with, that transition. Say I'm a developer, I'm a designer, I'm somebody, I'm listening to this podcast, I'm listening to Ryan, and I am interested in moving into the management side, but I've experienced people where they've come to me and said, well, I want to be on the management side of things. And I said, great, you should start acting like a manager. And then when you start to get good at that, we'll give you that title and do that. But I've had a lot of people say like, no, I need the title first, and then I can act like that manager, right? What's some of your advice for people that might be listening as they're thinking about moving into that, that role?
Those people who tell you they need the title first shouldn't probably be managers.
Okay.
I think you were right to tell them that they were wrong, Kurt. Because so much of it is a mindset of how do you help people. I'm a big fan of like servant leadership, where your job as a leader or as a manager is to really help the people that report into you. It is not to command and control. It is to support. And if you're asking for a title, you need authority. And the best managers all throughout my career don't ask for that authority. They help other people. It's not even about authority.
Right.
So the way, if you're thinking about getting into management, there's so many opportunities to do that on a day-to-day basis. It's just being cognizant of like you want to help others. Mentor, like think of it as mentorship as the first step into management. And if you have that mentality, you'll find those opportunities to get the credibility of the rest of the team. So, one of the challenges is always when you're in a big organization or you are one of like, say, 4 developers and as a manager of managers, you have to be like, I'm going to pick one of these 4 people to lead the other 3. And you always want that person you pick to have established that credibility amongst that team first. And that's why it's also critically important, just practically, if you're going to succeed and take over part of an existing team, to have like built that trust up and that help and that mentorship first. So no one's like, oh God, I hate that Kurt guy. Why is he my manager?
Oh, how many times have I heard that?
Yeah. So that's why it's also just critically important on a practical level too.
Let's flip it a bit and say I'm coming in as a manager for a new team. And what's some of your advice for somebody who might be coming in to kind of take over maybe an existing team or to grow an existing team? What are some of the first steps you would advise somebody to really spend time doing?
Yeah. Listen and do nothing else. Like that is number one, because you don't know what exactly is going on. People are exceedingly complicated and it takes time to do that. So as much as you might have strong thoughts from past experiences and patterns you may want to apply to the situation, it's best to take a step back and just listen to people talk and ask questions and then gather that info and then do something.
Right.
Try to find areas where you can help so you can establish that credibility. It's always the same as you need to create that trust and that view that like you can be there to help somebody.
Yeah.
And you're not just there because you need management and somebody needs to fill out Excel spreadsheets from day to day.
Right. So I want to unpack what you just said though. But I like it. Establish credibility. What's some of your advice? How can I establish credibility with my team? Yeah.
That's a really tough question to answer. I mean, if you're a first time manager, it's probably a little bit more technical. You can get your hands dirty. And that's actually way easier when you're coming in at a senior level and you may be managing managers or managing a larger team. It's tougher because you getting your hands dirty is actually doing a job that you shouldn't be doing.
Right.
And that's a lot. I don't know if I have an answer there. It's just you kind of have to feel it out and try to help and guide people that way. But if you're a first time manager, you can establish credibility by coaching. I would say if you're hopefully managing somebody that's also junior, it's easier to manage your junior developer as your first report, because then you can be a little hands-on. You can get some feedback, establish credibility that way. So it kind of depends. It's a really tough question. Managing is tough, Kurt.
Yeah, managing is tough. Why does it have to be so tough? Why do people have to be so complex? So speaking of people and complexity, like what about one-on-ones and things like that? Like how do you like to manage that sort of one-on-one sort of management with a team?
Oh man, how long is your podcast? Because one-on-ones could be like a 3-day
part 2 of Ryan, part 45.
So I would say managerial styles vary by person. For me, I'm a much better one-on-one communicator, I think, than I am public speaker or rah, let's go, charge this hill kind of leader. So I like to do hour-long one-on-ones. And my view on that is that it's mostly like 90% the report's time for them to talk to me, ask questions, get career guidance and coaching. And it's also 10% my time to kind of get their ideas on things and set the stage for kind of working through stuff. It's a way to include them in decisions I'm making and like maybe set the stage for changes I know I'm going to make, but they don't know they're coming yet.
Right.
But by and large, it's their time and I want them to find it valuable. And I've really, there's a lot of strong opinions out there. It's like, you should do one-on-ones this way and have these, like, you should pass around to-do lists and beforehand and yada, yada, yada. I just want to do what is ever effective for my report during that hour. So I will vary it towards that end.
Okay.
Right now I have people who come in with a long list of questions for me. Some people come in with Trello boards and it's all wonderful. And some people, we just have a conversation.
And that's okay.
Yeah. I will say I do like the one thing I would say, I tell my reports is like, it's not about status updates. If you're giving me a status update in your one-on-one, you're probably not communicating out where you're at your work effectively to enough people. And that's not a good use of that time. Like that's more about you and development. Whatever that development means is up to you.
Yeah.
But don't just tell me where this project's at.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I remember there was a time I was mentoring someone a while ago, and they had somebody who was interested in management. And so they kind of coached them around like, yeah, you got to help the team. You got to do this and that. And then over the course of a few weeks, they realized like, they were coming across kind of arrogant with the team. There was a hint of kind of this ego that happened that it was just overnight. And then all of a sudden they weren't getting as much work done before. And it seemed like the team kind of, it was a really interesting thing. And what I think I found later is that this person kind of managed them the one time, but thought that would just do it. Like they didn't realize that there's actually like, this is a process, like a mentorship. You don't just mentor and then that's why I call it mentorship, right? Yeah. Like it's a process, right?
Exactly.
So let's say you're mentoring somebody and let's say it's not working out. How have you found success in performance management with folks? How have you found to best kind of reset expectations and hopefully set up people for success?
Yeah. I think one of the best things that happened in my career, and I love the state of Minnesota, was actually getting outside of Minnesota nice for a little bit and being very direct. Because I think there's nothing more effective than telling somebody what you think of their performance and being open and honest about it. That doesn't mean you have to be a jerk as I say it, but you should, if you're not happy with the job someone's doing, you should tell them that thing and you should tell them why. And I get why people don't do it because it's a tough conversation to have.
It is a tough conversation,
but that doesn't mean you should avoid it.
Yeah.
Because then you're delaying the inevitable. Either that's going to get to a point where you're going to look at termination and they're going to wonder where it's coming from, or, it's just, they're going to continue to be unproductive and probably unhappy too.
Yeah.
And so the first thing is just be direct. And I think generally a rule with feedback, both positive and negative, the closer you can give that to the actual event that's happening, the better. Yeah. I think there's science behind it. Science is a good thing. So follow science, but it's just, tell if somebody did a bad job in a meeting, like you would have done it differently and it merits, tell them right afterwards in private, not during the meeting. Or if they did a great job, I think in a way, positive reinforcement too doesn't happen enough. Yeah. Everybody likes a pat on the back. Yeah. And positive reinforcement can be a great way to get people to do the thing you want to do more of. Yep. And again, like what I've learned and probably too much later in life, I should have learned all this earlier. It's really narcissistic of somebody to not give that negative feedback because you're worried about yourself more than you're kind of screwing with that person by not giving them that feedback, right? Exactly. You're being selfish.
Yeah.
You're avoiding a tough conversation because you don't want to have it. And you may rationalize it like, oh, they won't receive it well. But really, if you think about it for a second, if you were in their shoes, you'd want to know your boss wasn't happy with your performance on this thing and how you could improve. And you're just being selfish because you want to avoid that conversation. That's not fair to your report.
To be a good manager, you've got to be a bit introspective, right? You've got to know what some of your triggers are. You've got to understand that, oh yeah, I avoid to give this, this tough feedback, and it's difficult because you don't want to come across as a jerk, but you don't want to come across a jerk, not because you actually care that what that other person's, you know what I mean? You just don't want to look like a jerk.
Yeah. And this is the thing with management. It's like, that's so out of your normal day to day, right? Like if you went to a restaurant and had bad service, you're not going to tell the waiter,
right.
I was very disappointed with the job you did today. You could have brought me my check earlier. and that's the weird thing about being like, so you don't normally do it in social situations.
Right.
But it's so, and for a people business and managing, it's all about people. You need to do it.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing about software is that I say it all the time. I mean, it's a people sport, software and design. Like it's people, like 20% of it is actually the code stuff. The 80% of it is the communication and the interpersonal relationships.
Yeah. Yep.
And that's how you actually get stuff done.
All the code problems are caused by people.
Yeah.
Like ultimately, a person made a decision that may not have been the right one, long term or short term,
right.
that got you in the boat. So every problem is a people problem, even in software. Just because you're writing code into a text editor doesn't mean it's not a person doing it.
Right. Well, and so let's talk about that first time manager, that person that is, that maybe they got promoted or maybe they're new to the company. How about managing up for that person? How have you been successful in managing up in your career?
This is actually something I really struggle with. I remember when I was at BuzzFeed, I had a thing where we crashed the apps in production. Essentially, it wasn't starting up. And I got an email from Jonah, the CEO of BuzzFeed, was like, you need to let me know when these things happen. So this has always been something I've struggled with because I'm very much of that kind of person who's just like, this is my thing. I got it. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, I'll fix it.
But that is not good for your reports or you individually. So it's something I've always struggled with. And I think generally a good thing is just to probably over communicate, not under. And if you have that mentality, there's really no cost to doing this, saying here's where I'm at and getting feedback. And it's tough to do that. I really struggle with this. And it's normal, I think.
Yeah,
I hope it's normal.
I think it's normal.
But it's really just, taking that extra 30 seconds and being cognizant of it. It's just like, it's about empathy in the end. Mm-hmm. If I was my boss, would I want to know about this thing? Mm-hmm. If you have that empathy there, you'll communicate probably at the effective level.
Yeah, that's good advice. I think empathy with management or your bosses and things goes a long way because a lot of times people just look at those folks and be like, you've got it figured out. You know everything. You're way up there. I'm down here. If something happens, you'll just deal. You know what I mean? Like yep. They just assume that. And then what happens the other direction is the management's like, I assume everybody's got my best interest in mind too.
Yep. And you may be misaligned. And the only way you find out there's misalignment is by forcing communication, but by communicating. Is I think it's A and you think it's B, we have a problem and we should communicate and figure out how it's actually combined. It's either A or B.
Right. And so one last question I want to talk to you about is doing effective meetings, team meetings and things. I always talk to people who they struggle with doing meetings because sometimes, like I know people that do typical Scrum stand-ups. Yep. Some people do it very ceremonial. They follow it exactly and it's exactly 14 minutes long and blah, blah, blah. And then other people who they send out a form ahead of time that just says what are you working on, whatever. And then people just add context to things. There's so many different ways to do it. Where have you found success and what advice would you give on people on getting team meetings a positive sort of spin?
I think to give it a positive spin, I think ultimately you have a meeting for a reason. Mm-hmm. If you don't have a meeting, if you don't have a reason for that meeting, you should cancel that meeting.
You know what one of my favorite things is when a meeting is canceled.
Oh, it's beautiful.
It's such an amazing feeling.
Yeah.
It's like a dopamine rush when I see it's like meeting has been canceled. I'm like,
it's cathartic.
It is.
It's the event deleted. Oh, thank God. I got 30 minutes. It's beautiful because it's 30 minutes of my life I just got back that I wasn't planning on. It's wonderful.
Thank you. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, you're spot on. But no. I think you have a meeting to probably solve a problem. There's there's alignment meetings or, to reach a decision. And it's be cognizant of why do you have that meeting in the first place. I would say, there's a lot of different ways to do it. The lawyer in me loves the Amazon strategy of writing a memo, but that's horribly impractical for almost everyone else in the world.
And impersonal, right?
You can also, I usually start meetings I'm running and called with here's what we're trying to accomplish in this meeting. And that at least gives a framework. And if you can send it out in advance, all the better. That way people can prep for it. But it's really just being focused on the objective. I mean, so much of life in product development and engineering is like, what problem are you trying to solve by doing this thing? Focus on that thing. Meetings are no different than anything else.
That's great. Great advice. Well, Ryan, I want to thank you for joining me on the show today. I can tell you and I could talk for a very long time about lots of different things, but I appreciate you sharing your knowledge and info. So if I want to learn more about Ryan and Foodsby, like where should I go to learn more?
Well, if you want to learn more about Foodsby or order lunch for your office, if you're in a Foodsby building, you go to foodsby.com. By all means, go there and order. If you want more about me, even though as someone who work at BuzzFeed, I don't have a huge social media presence. You can find me on Twitter at _Ryan Johnson _. My Instagram feed is largely one of nachos taken around the world. But feel free to DM me on Twitter, or you can email me at ryan.johnson@Foodsby if you need help managing and supporting it. I also say my friend, the former VP of design, is a guy named Cap Watkins. He has a company called PracticalWorks.co. His entire thing is around helping first-time managers kind of go through this battle.
Cool.
I send some of our first-time managers at Foodsby through that program. Cap's wonderful. He's great at this kind of stuff. So if somebody's looking for a more competent resource than me, they should talk to Cap. So
cool. Well, I'll put links to all that in the show notes. And again, Ryan, I want to thank you for taking the time. I know you're a busy guy, but I appreciate you stopping by to sit down and chat.
Thanks, Kurt.
Thank you for listening to The Schmidt List. If you want to learn more about how Foundry accelerates innovation, check out foundrymakes.com. And if you'd like me to speak about establishing a growth mindset at your conference or with your team, drop me a note at kurt@foundrymakes.com. Oh, and the next time you're on the internet, head to iTunes and leave the show a review. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend, because sharing is caring. I truly appreciate you taking the time to listen to the show, and I hope you have a fantastic week.